got our safe pillows.
We got our drinks.
We got our drinks. I'm drinking a cold brew coffee.
I'm drinking a huge water.
Huge water. You're going to have to go to the bathroom halfway through this.
Maybe.
We're here in your office.
Yep.
Do you normally sit in this chair when you're doing therapy?
Well, I just rearranged this office, so normally I would just do whatever.
This feels like the therapist chair.
It does. But it's wherever the client feels most comfortable.
Is that how that works with you?
For me, it does, yeah.
Grateful that you're doing another podcast. We did one already.
Yeah.
It was awesome.
Good.
Got to hear your story, and we'll link to that so people can go back and hear more about you if they want to.
Yeah.
Wasn't that honestly that interesting to me, but I'm just kidding. It was awesome. I love being able to talk with you. I love your sense of humor. I love the work you do here. I won't rehash our funny story the way we met, but you can go back and listen to that on the first episode that we did together.
Yeah.
But I just appreciate how you kind of show up around the office. I think it adds some levity and some fun.
Thank you.
To
a very chaotic,
challenging.
I mean, you have to.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's a survival mode, maybe.
Kind of.
That's awesome. And we could probably do a whole episode on your son, Jackson. But we won't.
Oh, man. Yes, we could.
Just turned 5.
Just turned 5, kindergarten, says funny
so
things.
Cute. He is funny.
Just like quintessential energetic boy and so sweet.
Yeah.
Just sweet boy.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
All right, so today we're going to talk about You got a little tear in your eye there, didn't you? Talking about Jackson. You didn't look like you were getting choked up.
Not yet.
No?
Although I get really passionate about Polyvagal. For real.
Seriously?
Yeah. So I feel really deeply.
Okay.
I'm a 4 on the Enneagram, which
didn't know that
means
about you.
I feel everything, and then I have feelings about my feelings. So I just get easily tearful.
When there's like issues going on, do you always think it's your fault?
Not anymore.
You know what I mean? Like a lot of my 4 friends, if they feel like a tension in me, they always assume that we have an issue, but they can just sense that I'm off. Yeah. And I love that about them. They're so and maybe I'm pigeonholing them, but
I mean, yeah, and that's a good thing to talk about with Polyvagal too.
See what we did there?
You just unknowingly segued.
So full disclosure, I know very little about Polyvagal. You told me a little bit a visit or 2 ago, and I was like, we should do a podcast on that.
Yeah.
We weren't teaching that theory as much when I was here at Valiant.
Because I brought it in.
Did you?
I did.
Okay. So I'm excited because this will be all new info for me. So even like my question, I'm like, I don't even know hardly what to ask. So
those were good questions, actually.
Well, could you just start like right at the top, like explain what is polyvagal theory?
So simply put, polyvagal is the science of safety.
Okay.
So our nervous system is looking for signs of safety or signs of threat. That's like simply what it is in a nutshell.
Subconsciously, as we go down through life, we're looking for, is this a threat or am I safe?
Yeah, and it's not in your brain. It's not cognitively. It's in your body.
Okay.
So your body is reading different situations, interactions with people, all sorts of things to determine, right, is this safe or is this a threat?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was developed by Stephen Porges.
Okay.
So
I read about that.
Yeah, mid-90s scientist, looked at polyvagal from the side of studying animals and human beings and that nervous system component, very scientific. His books are a little
kind of
heady.
Yeah.
And then Deb Dana came around maybe like 20 years later. She's a clinician and she adapted polyvagal for a clinical setting. So her books are a little bit easier to follow.
To digest.
Yeah.
What drew you to this as a theory or a modality? Is it a modality as well, or is it more of a theory?
It's more of a theory.
Okay.
It's not an evidence-based treatment. But I kind of see it as a way of life, as a way of seeing the world and myself.
Hence why we have safe pillows right now.
Yeah,
this
I
is
know.
a polyvagal thing.
And hence why I rearranged this office.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh man, my nervous system feels better.
Gotcha. So even that matters. How you
totally
feel
matters.
when you walk into a room.
Yes.
Don't cover your makeup. You know, this is your second podcast. You should be pro by now.
I'm not an expert. I'm so sorry. I don't feel safe.
I just created what would you call that in polyvagal?
Sympathetic.
An unsafe.
Sympathetic. I'm like, my heart is racing a little bit.
I'm glad that we were able to do a case study right here on the podcast.
This is real time. Real time, man.
Yeah. So
I forgot what you asked.
I was talking about how you came into, and this is how you see the world.
Yes.
Yeah.
So my son was born 5 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and I had pretty bad postpartum anxiety.
Okay.
And, you know, whatever, I got through it, I got stabilized, and then the pandemic hit.
Mm.
I look back, I'm like, okay, that's
What a time.
what
Back
a time.
to back. Yeah.
What a time, universe. So
you had a 1-year-old basically.
6-month-old.
6-month-old
Yep.
during COVID.
First time parents.
Okay.
And then you have the experience of, I think everybody has their COVID traumas.
Sure.
And ours were, impacted by political separation, but different beliefs around COVID within our family of origin.
Okay.
And that activated my nervous system. And there was medical stuff my husband and I were going through, and being really isolated.
Okay.
So I was pretty stuck in a state, sympathetic and dorsal. I'll talk more about that.
Okay.
For a couple years.
Wow.
And I couldn't understand why. Like, I'm thinking all the right things of trying to get myself to feel better, but I couldn't. I was just stuck.
Interesting.
And then I took this training it was an EMDR refresher, and then they did a little bit on polyvagal. I was like, oh my God, this makes sense. Like, my nervous system is stuck.
So you had like a aha moment. Like, this is what I've been in for the last 2 years.
And I didn't know.
Didn't know how to get out of it because you didn't have language for it yet.
And I still didn't know how to get out of it. So the next year was still really hard. Okay. Again, still in the pandemic, things were going on. This was before Valiant. So I worked worked for a group practice essentially, and I was alone in an empty office, just doing telehealth. Oh. And it was really brutal.
That has to be tough.
Yep. And so what actually got me out of it was working at Valiant.
Oh, really?
When Stephen and Michael Sims were like, hey, you should come over here. And then within, I don't know, a month, I was like, oh my God, I feel better. Because it was being around other people. It was
like
feeling
the community aspect of it helped.
The connection, I don't feel so alone.
So when we first met, it's interesting, you were still actively in that kind of state or starting to come out of it.
I was starting to come out of it. Like, I felt like myself again.
Yeah.
You know?
That's really interesting.
Yep.
So you're just like, hey, we have to incorporate this into...
Yes. And I started doing groups on it. And every time I did a group, I was learning more. Because polyvagal, like, I'll talk about the basics, but it's pretty vast. You know, once you read more about it and once you start to understand more, it's just...
Well, and as part of your fear on even doing this podcast is how in the world do we cover this topic? And I was like, well, we're not going to try it. Let's just talk about what we can talk about. And then maybe, what's the appetite for people to go do some more reading or research, or maybe they have an aha moment as we're talking through this.
What I'm hoping.
So the disclaimer is we're not going to cover all of the polyvagal
this
theory.
This is just the tenets.
The high level kind of overview of it.
Yeah.
Where's the best place to start when it comes to unpacking this, right?
In terms of like literature?
Yeah, or I mean, just for our understanding, even on this podcast. Like, so, you're talking about kind of how we show up in the world, our nervous system, all that different things. Where's the best place to kind of jump off with this conversation?
So I think the vagus nerve is a good place to start. Okay. So the vagus nerve, we hear about it all the time, and we're like, what is the vagus nerve? So vagus, what's that?
I've never heard of it before.
You've never heard of it?
No.
Okay. It's like, I feel like if you search it on TikTok or social media, there's all these videos on the vagus nerve. Okay. So basically it's the 10th cranium nerve. Okay. So it starts at the back of our brain stems, and it kind of goes all around our bodies and lands in our gut. Huh. So when we say things like, oh, I have this gut feeling, or, my heart feels, oh my gosh, my heart feels broken. I feel it in my heart. Yeah. That's the vagus nerve.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. So it's sort of this like, this cable that goes from our body to our brain or our brain to our body. And it's just sending information in this in either down or up in this place of information.
All right. So we don't have to follow this rabbit trail, but does this affect gut health?
Totally.
Okay.
Yes.
We need to talk about that.
Absolutely. So this is an interesting thing I read about is 80% of what we experience goes from brain to body. I'm sorry, body to brain. Okay. And 20% goes from brain to body.
Interesting.
Which is really, like, when I read that, I was like, wait.
It feels backwards.
It feels backwards. Like I think we tend to think that, our thoughts control our body. And it does but that's only 20% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
So really what informs our thinking starts in our body.
Interesting.
And that makes sense, right? It's like times where, okay, I feel really stuck and my thinking isn't getting me out of this.
Right.
It's our bodies,
You can't
right?
think your way out of...
Not when you're locked in a state.
Okay. Can we go there next?
Yeah, let's go there.
So that was part of some of the research I did. 3 different states our nervous system can be in. There's the social engagement state, there's the fight or flight state, and the shutdown state.
Yep.
Is that the language you use for that?
Yeah, so let me give an overview. So
Okay.
the autonomic nervous system is what has these 3 states.
Okay.
So when you hear of autonomic, think of automatic.
Okay.
Like physiologically, this is our heart beating, it's our lungs breathing, it's our digestion, like things that are happening automatically without us thinking about it.
Okay.
And within the autonomic nervous system, there's 2 branches. So there's the sympathetic and the parasympathetic.
Okay.
And then just to confuse you even more.
Could you were reading that on my face?
I was like, he's zooming out a little bit. And we're gone. The parasympathetic has 2 pathways. So this is the vagus nerve. So one pathway goes from brain to gut.
Okay.
And then the other pathway goes gut to neck and throat and ears and eyes and sort of the facial nerves.
Interesting.
So that's sort of the overview of the autonomic nervous system. And then within that, there's 3 states.
Okay.
So ventral vagal
Okay.
is, I say up here because that's where a lot of the nerves are, is in our kind of our head and our neck and our heart a little bit. Sympathetic, and then dorsal vagal.
Okay.
So I'll start with ventral.
Okay.
So ventral is where we feel totally safe.
Okay.
We feel connected, we feel resourced, we feel grounded. And when we are in ventral, that's when we're accessing that social engagement system that you talked about.
Okay.
So that's where we are.
So those 2 are connected, the social engagement
and the ventral.
and ventral.
But you can't engage the social engagement system unless you're in ventral, unless you feel
completely safe
and calm and like, yeah.
What are some examples of that?
So this can be hard for people, especially in early recovery.
Yeah.
Because it's like, I don't know what that feels like.
Right. That's what I'm asking myself right now. Yeah. I'm 2 years sober, but I still have a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety, so I'm like, how do I get to that state? I don't want that state yet.
Well, you have it in small moments.
Yeah.
So these are called glimmers.
Yeah.
So like if you're with your kids,
totally.
Right? That's a moment of ventral.
Yeah.
If you have a pet and you're just like, petting the dog or the cat and you're like, okay, I feel really calm. Or you're looking at something beautiful like a sunset or something in nature.
Right. So you have these glimmers of being in a ventral state.
Yeah, and sometimes they're more than glimmers, but I think that's a good place to start when people are saying, I don't know what that feels like. I've been living in sympathetic for 20 years. Is that helpful?
That's super helpful. Okay. Yeah, because I relate to that because I definitely have moments where I feel a lot of peace and I feel like it's just not my default.
And I don't think it is for a lot of us.
Okay.
Right, because a lot of us, I feel like most everyone has trauma in some capacity.
Sure.
And so we oftentimes don't really know what ventral feels like, which is why we have to start paying attention and why we call it those glimmers.
Yeah,
so noticing like, oh yeah, that's...
When your mind is kind of at rest and you're not,
Not necessarily at rest because when we're in ventral, we're actually able to make better decisions.
Okay.
Like your prefrontal cortex, that executive functioning is accessible when you're in ventral.
So this is not a matter of just total disengagement then.
No.
This is actually just a healthier way of responding and thinking.
Yes.
Okay.
So like when you're in a group, like when you were here, and when you were really feeling connected to the other men and you were really feeling safe, that's an example of ventral.
Okay.
Yep.
So it's not even necessarily... Is it void of anxiety, or can you have ventral and still, because like in that moment you just described, yes, I felt completely safe and all those things, but it wasn't like I had no problems or issues in the world.
Totally.
Right?
It just means for that moment,
For that
though.
moment, yeah.
Right,
Okay.
because these things are they can be moments.
Yeah. I'm tracking.
Yep.
That's awesome. All right, and the next one.
So sympathetic.
Anything more on that, the ventral?
We'll probably come back to it.
Okay.
But for now, yeah.
Then you've got sympathetic. Is that in conjunction with the...
That's fight or flight.
Okay.
Right. So when we are feeling safe, sympathetic is we're taking a run We are feeling motivated. It's a state of mobilization.
Okay.
So there's movement happening. That's when we feel safe.
Okay.
I think of Melissa a lot.
Okay.
She's got a lot of sympathetic, like she's got energy and she's on the move and
constantly.
So it's not a bad thing.
No.
Actually, none of these states are a bad thing. They're just adaptive.
Okay.
When we're feeling unsafe, when we feel danger, fight or flight, anger, anxiety, panic attacks, irritability, defensiveness, rage. So that feeling, right?
That's all in that sympathetic state.
All in the sympathetic, right? I'm guessing you know what that feels like.
Yeah, I mean, that feels. I haven't heard the third one, but I feel like fight or flight is probably where I live most of the time.
Yeah.
Because I feel like for me, I can swing that pendulum pretty quick. So when I feel my anxiety peak, I usually have one. I'm going to take control and I'm going to go and fix this thing. I'm going to make it happen. I'm going to go whatever. Or the other way, like I'm like, I can't do this anymore. I got to go. Then I'm kind of the polar opposites.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know if that's more shutdown state or fight or flight, but that feels like my natural response to anxiety is to either take more control or to escape.
Is it to escape or to, and I guess we don't know yet if it's shut down. But when you're in that state, what do you feel in your body? How do you know you're anxious, for instance?
Well, I feel like my mind is in constant racing.
Okay.
Figuring, strategizing.
Yeah.
And so a lot of this is a great therapy session for me, by the way. This is
Welcome.
awesome.
It's my office.
I feel very safe.
It's designed that way.
So, mind constantly racing, and I'm trying to figure it out mode and come up with a solution to make myself feel more at peace, or I'm actively checking out to not have my mind race and not think about those things. Is not as often where I feel like I'm at like awareness of the situation but at peace with it.
Right.
It's either like numb out. It could just be like TV I need to watch. I need to just get my mind on something totally different.
Yeah.
Or got to work. I
got to do something.
For me, it's mostly around finances, if I'm being honest.
Yeah,
that's
a trigger.
Yeah.
Right.
So a lot of financial fear.
Totally.
Yeah.
So I think all of us have different triggers that activate that sympathetic response.
Okay.
Right. Finances, social media.
Yes.
Being in an election year, reading headlines.
Yeah.
Lines. Anywhere that you have to wait in line.
Oh yeah.
Crowded malls. Traffic.
Yeah.
Right. Now, if we're pretty resourced, let's use this example of you're driving wherever and you hear a fire truck.
Okay.
And you have that like, okay, I got to pull over, and you have that like shot of adrenaline, and then you take a deep breath, and then you can move back up to ventral. You're not really stuck there because you just feel it for a minute, and then you go back up.
I think I might have had that today actually.
Okay.
Because I was sitting in the courtyard having lunch with a new client, and I had almost like a PTSD because he was starting his 90 days. And I went back to sitting in that courtyard at the beginning of my 90 days, and I started feeling panicky. Almost as if I was like starting it, like my mind was telling me I was back in treatment
or
again.
Maybe your body. I don't know.
My body. Oh yeah. That makes sense. But I was able to be like, it was a moment. I was able. Oh, no, this is good, helpful, whatever. But yeah, it came over me like a wave. Like I was like, yeah.
No, that's a great example.
Okay.
So that's how this stuff gets stored, right? Is those memories are stored in our body.
Okay.
And even though rationally you're like, okay, well, I'm not starting treatment. No. Like I'm just hanging out with this dude.
I gotta flight home tomorrow. What am I talking about? Yeah.
But your body's remembering what that feels like, and then it's informing your thinking. And that's because
exactly
you're
right, yes.
because you're fairly resourced, I would imagine you're going up to ventral and pretty quickly, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Like it all happened while we were sitting there at lunch.
Yes.
The 4 guys with me had no idea it was happening.
Yes.
But I was like, wow, I feel like I'm here, and let me kind of, I don't even know the right language, but kind of talk myself through this moment.
Yes.
To get like, I'm okay,
You're
okay, everything's okay.
Right. And again, you had enough ventral energy
Okay.
to have that decision making and to talk
Okay.
yourself through it.
Gotcha.
So, for instance, I guess my experience of those couple of years where I was locked in sympathetic and dorsal,
Yeah.
my view about the story I was saying about I am, people are, the world is,
You couldn't get out.
those answers were dictated by that state. So when we're in ventral, you know, I am safe. The world, no, people are beautiful, and the world is safe. When you go in sympathetic and you answer those same questions, they're going to be different.
Interesting.
Because you're in a different state.
Okay.
Yep. And we're going to move up and down the ladder.
Yeah.
The ladder meaning ventral, sympathetic, dorsal. We're going to move up and down that ladder probably like all day.
Okay.
Unless we're stuck in that state.
Gotcha.
Um,
Anything else? Anything more on that one?
I don't think so.
Okay, we can come back to it.
We'll come back to it.
All right, and then
Yeah.
dorsal is the last, or
Yep, dorsal.
shutdown.
Yeah, so dorsal, shutdown, immobilization.
Okay.
So if sympathetic is danger, dorsal is extreme danger.
Okay.
And again, this is not about actually being safe, it's about feeling safe.
Okay.
So the example that you just had of you're anxious, you want to take control, and then you're like, whatever, I'm going to just watch TV.
Yeah.
That sounds like dorsal.
Okay.
It sounds like you've had it.
Yeah.
Your immobilization or dorsal can be depression. It can just be like walking through the day, like
Numbing out a little bit.
I'm out. That's the case of the efforts.
Yeah.
Suicide ideation lives here. You just don't really care.
You're just exhausted
you're just
with
done.
dealing with yeah.
Yep. And again, when we're stuck there, it can have effects on us.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's pretty common too.
Right.
Right.
Well, it is helpful to know that it can fluctuate throughout the day.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yep.
Is where my mind's going next, so we can take it wherever you want to go. But you've said stuck a few times. My mind is, I mean, how do I avoid getting stuck? How do you get stuck? And then, are there ways to get unstuck? You talked about a job. You moved jobs that helped you get unstuck.
Mm-hmm.
But for those listening or watching that are hearing, like, man, I think I might be stuck.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'm like, how do you
get
get
out?
stuck, and
Yeah.
then how do you get unstuck?
So I think we get stuck by, I mean, it just depends on the experience that we're going through.
Okay.
And the first part of this is just identifying what state you're in. It's all about awareness.
Yep.
And then being able to practice what's going to get you through it or out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of this is going to look different for many people. So thinking about sympathetic when we're in that anxious place, for instance, sometimes that might move by exercising. Sometimes that might move by taking a walk or connecting with somebody. One thing is you call someone and you just like rant when you're anxious or angry.
Yeah.
Sometimes that can help.
That can help get you.
Sometimes it's going to make it worse. It just depends. Sometimes cleaning when we're in that like anxious or angry state because we're moving that energy.
Mm-hmm.
Dorsal might be something like, you know, you're doing some self-soothing. You're trying to meditate or pray, or sometimes you just need to go to sleep.
Yeah.
And then
Shut
wake
it
up
down
and you're
try
like,
again.
I feel better the next day.
Yeah.
So I think some of these states are really dictated by trying a couple different things and figuring out what works for you.
Yeah.
I know personally I struggle with meditating. Touching my heart.
It's okay.
I have a lot of feelings.
It's okay. You're 4.
I know. I'm a 4.
You can't help it.
That's
I love
right.
it.
Thank you.
Perfect. You don't have to change. Just wish you'd quit hitting your mic.
I will change that. I will change that.
If you change that little thing about yourself, it'll be great.
Perfect. Yeah, like I don't like meditating. I've always struggled with it.
Okay.
And I recently I was listening to a podcast by Deb Dana, and it helped me feel so much better because meditating isn't for everybody. You know, for me, sitting still with my thoughts actually causes me anxiety.
Yeah.
And so
part of it is finding your pathway to
Right.
whatever it might be. For some
Right.
people, it's hard work. Like I had someone tell me recently, the only way for me to get out of that is to like brutally hard workout. Like not just a walk or whatever, but I want to go and just really work out hard, and that
might not work
helps
for you.
them. That's not my jam.
Totally.
That's not my thing, you know.
Yeah.
But like a walk or something like for me is like,
Yes.
yeah.
And that's what I love about this is there's no shoulds. Like, well,
Okay.
you're in dorsal, you should do this.
Right.
Like, okay, no, it doesn't work for me.
Right.
So really like starting to befriend your nervous system
Yes.
and figure out, okay, what feels safe? It's all about safety. Working a brutal workout, it doesn't feel safe. You feel whatever.
Yeah, not for me.
Not for you.
Right.
Yep.
Well, and one thing, a little bit tangent, but one thing that I love about what I took away from Valiant that you guys teach a lot is what you just said about showing compassion and befriending these different, you know, we've talked parts of self on here and now this. It's like, I love that you guys help us not feel shame about what we're experiencing at that moment. Like, you know, we're feeling a certain way. Okay, well, let's have some awareness around it, which is really helpful. But we kind of pull out the right and wrong, bad and right. You know what I'm saying? Good and bad, that type of thing.
Exactly.
It's not about that anymore. It's about, okay, even with addiction, which I want to get into here in a minute, how this shows up and affects addiction, trauma, and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But it's so beautiful how you guys teach us to befriend those things and to look at it and be like, okay, at one point we even thanked certain addictions that helped us survive certain moments that God said, we don't need them anymore. Thank God we don't have to use them anymore. But I think that's a really beautiful part of recovery.
Totally. And it's, if you come into a program and you're sort of beat down, your nervous system isn't going to feel safe. Your nervous system is going to go to a place of probably sympathetic or dorsal. It doesn't, you know, one of those. And you're not going to be able to do the work. And I think this is sort of a known about therapy, but this gives it more language around, if you don't feel safe in this space with me, with another person, you're going to have a different experience, right?
Totally. Yeah. So how does this play out specific for recovery, addiction recovery, trauma? How do you see this kind of interacting with those things in this specific context?
Well, so in terms of the addiction piece, it's kind of, you know, what feelings, what state are you in that you are numbing with a certain substance?
Okay.
So meaning, I'll use myself as an example. So my drugs of choice were alcohol and weed. I started using in my late teens. I was pretty depressed most of the time. And when I found weed, I was like, oh man, I don't feel so depressed anymore. I kind of feel good. But it wasn't really ventral. But my system thought it was. It was this like mask.
Kind of tricking your system into thinking.
Thinking I feel better. And alcohol, same kind of thing. It actually, most of the time, it elevated my energy. It kind of gave me that different relationship with the world and myself.
Right.
For some people who might have sex addiction, I'm using a bland example, but they might feel depressed, and then like the planning stage of acting out is really exciting and kind of anxiety inducing. So they're going to be in sympathetic, and then they use and the shame, or they act out and the shame happens. So they're going to go back down to dorsal. So that's kind of how this plays out.
Right.
So it's really getting curious in early recovery of what state was I in that I didn't want to be in, that my addiction was trying to protect me from.
Yeah.
I mean, polyvagal and IFS actually pair really beautifully together.
Oh, really? Yeah. I mean, as you're talking, I'm like, gosh, there seems to be
so many parallels,
similarities.
So if you think of your system as it's not wrong, it's just protecting you.
Right.
Protection over connection.
Ooh, I like that.
Yep.
Protection over. So it's just a matter of which direction do you turn to try to get to a more grounded state.
Right.
Right. So in addiction, we're in is either the fight or flight, the shutdown state, and we're trying to get to that peaceful state, right? Is that what you're saying?
Right.
So we're turning to these other things.
Right. To numb out, even.
To numb out,
so
right.
Another example is somebody who's just really anxious, like all the time, and they use a substance to kind of go, okay, I can just like not feel anything. So it's dorsal, and that helps keep them safe. Perceived safety, right?
So what's the goal then? Is the goal to find tools to help you get to that safe state without, you're shaking your head no already, so I'm off track.
So yes and no. So the goal is not to be in ventral all the time.
Okay.
That's not a thing.
That's where I was going with that.
Yeah, totally.
So
and I think that's a common question.
Okay.
Because we're human beings and we're going to fluctuate, and we need these systems.
So that's what I'm sitting here thinking. Give me tools so I can stay in ventral 99% of the time.
All the time.
Okay.
But then we wouldn't feel, let me talk about mixed states really quick, because this is important. So when we are in ventral and sympathetic, we are feeling energized and mobilized and also connected to other people. So say like, you're going to play pickleball with friends, or you're dancing with your kids. That's a mixed state. We need that. A mixed state of ventral and dorsal is rest and relaxation and love and intimacy.
Okay.
So I think about
so you can be experiencing
two at the same time.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's just the way the vagus nerve is sort of, there's pictures of it you can find of the way the vagus nerve is lying in your system.
Interesting.
It's a huge nerve. It's called the wanderer in Latin because it goes all over our bodies.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, no wonder it plays such a huge role in how we show up in the world.
Right, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So I think of a picture of a caregiver, reading to their child or putting their child to bed. That is ventral and dorsal. Like you're relaxed, you're connected. You're not touching your microphone.
Right. It's fine.
Yeah.
So help me understand this a little bit more. When you say it's both,
yeah,
it's because the ventral you're feeling peaceful, but how does the shutdown state show up in that
so
moment?
not always shutdown. So
Okay.
when we feel safe in dorsal, we feel at rest. We feel relaxed. It's a little bit confusing, and it's because these are both part of the parasympathetic.
Got it.
So they can feel really similar when we are safe in dorsal and when we're safe in ventral.
Got it.
The difference with ventral is that you're able to access that social engagement piece.
Gotcha.
And
you're not shut off. You're not disconnected.
Right. Right.
That makes total sense.
Yes.
So dorsal rest is like I'm numbed out. I'm maybe escaping. I'm maybe not in tune or connected with the world around me.
When we're not safe.
When we're not safe.
Right.
Okay.
And when we are safe, it can be, again, like you're in group and you're sitting down and you're relaxed, but you're engaged. You're listening. You're connected to your peers and to the facilitator.
Gotcha.
So you're in that mixed state.
Gotcha.
There's connection happening.
Okay.
And then sympathetic and dorsal, that's the freeze. So fight flight is sympathetic. Freeze is actually sympathetic and dorsal.
Interesting.
So that's where we want to move, we want to go, but we can't.
Can't make
it's
ourselves
just
do it.
like.
Is it apathy?
I feel like apathy might be more dorsal.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just not given a F.
Right. What does F stand for again?
Frank?
All right.
Can I talk to you about one more thing?
Yeah, please. Well, I was about to turn the corner, so.
So
good.
neuroception, it's just such a great word, and it's a great explanation around polyvagal.
Okay.
So neuroception is sort of like our spidey sense.
Okay.
So it's our home surveillance system. It's constantly scanning the environment for signs of safety, signs of threat.
Okay.
And it does this three ways: outside, inside, in between.
Okay.
So outside is the environment. It's this room. It's lighting. It's
External. Okay.
Right. And it could be on a bigger scale, like what we experience in the world around, racism, sexism, sexual orientation, things in our bodies that we're going to say, is this safe or not? Inside is what's happening in our body. So this is all, like, I think of chronic pain or just feeling sick, right? That's going to determine which nervous system state we go into.
Okay.
And then in between is my nervous system and your nervous system, kind of picking up those cues.
Interesting.
Right. So right now I was kind of nervous at the beginning of this.
Yeah.
And then as we're talking, I'm settling down. I still have some excitement, but I feel safe. I feel connected. My nervous system feels really attuned to yours.
So that's kind of when you're vibing, or if I'm picking up on someone's emotion and that's affecting how I'm experiencing that moment. That's
right.
Okay.
Your neuroception is kicking in, and then it informs your autonomic nervous system which state to go in.
Oh, okay.
So it's really cool. It's detection without perception. So our bodies are detecting something without us thinking, like, oh, it's safe. Like we're not thinking
we're not
that.
Going there.
It's just our bodies feel it first. And it's by neuroception. And Stephen Porges invented that word. And it's pretty cool.
That's super cool.
Yeah.
How does, or this is another rabbit trail, this is where my mind went. What's the difference in that and codependency? As far as, do you know what I'm saying? Like I'm taking on your, I'm feeling what you're feeling, so I'm now taking on your, because I think there's empathy. Like I can feel what you're feeling, but I'm not also gonna enter into that
Yeah.
anger with you or whatever.
Well, that's a really good point. And I think, yeah, our nervous systems are going to constantly read and react to one another.
Okay.
But then I think it's maybe the behavior that we take it
Gotcha.
to.
That makes total
Right.
sense.
So if we are affected by somebody's nervous system and then it completely rules our day, determines our day, and maybe that person's in a different state,
Right.
but we're still carrying it,
Right.
that's maybe
That's
some codependent stuff.
codependency.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if we didn't perceive it at all, then we're kind of walking down through the world without empathy or being able to see other people or
Right.
yeah.
There's
so,
that inability to connect,
Right,
which then we
right.
kind of go back to addiction and intimacy
Yeah,
disorder, and
yeah.
it all lines up, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
This is so good. All right. Can we turn anything else on that? Because I want to talk a little bit about for supporting loved ones
Yes.
through this.
Yes.
Because a lot of people that listen and watch this are listening and watching, drink.
Cheers. Cheers.
On behalf of a loved one that's either here at Valiant or
Mhm.
struggling with addiction or something like that.
I think.
How is just understanding this? How is it helpful for us to be able to like show up for these
For the clients,
Yeah.
for their spouses
for the
and loved
spouses,
ones.
loved ones,
Yeah.
kids?
I think the first step is to understand your own nervous system.
Oh yeah.
I think it's to recognize, all right, gosh, this person's addiction has really sent me into a spiral, and I've been living in sympathetic for however long. And what do I need to do to take care of myself and help regulate myself? Again, not always in ventral, but learn to befriend my nervous system so
Yep.
that I can better show up for the loved one.
Yeah.
Because I've seen this happen so many times where the client is getting healthier, but the family member isn't because their nervous system is stuck.
That's right.
And then we're treating the family more than the client.
Yes.
And that's why we encourage family members, like, come to the groups, do therapy, do whatever you need to do to help resource and regulate your nervous system, because of course you're traumatized,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So that's
Which I love that the answer that you guys almost always give to how can I best support and serve my loved one is to do your own work.
of course.
I mean, and that can be tough, especially if
Yeah.
there's betrayal or trauma or whatever, where it's like,
This isn't my problem.
I didn't do that. They
yeah,
did this.
yeah, they did, and it affected
Affected you.
the nervous system.
Yeah.
And if you think of it like that, to have some compassion around, like, yes, they did this, but I'm impacted,
Yep.
and I need to take care of myself so
Yep.
that even if I'm not better for them, I'm better for
Right.
myself, for my
Right.
kids.
Right.
Um,
Right. It may not even be your fault, your whatever,
Yeah.
but what's the line you guys say all the time? It may not be your fault, but it's your responsibility to then kind of care for yourself.
Absolutely. Yes.
And yeah, I love that that's an emphasis here, the family system.
It's so
with that,
important. I like to
because-
think of it like a solar system. And when the addict is, everybody's circling around the addict,
Yep.
and it's dysfunctional, and then the addict gets clean and sober, but the family is still off balance.
Yep.
And so everybody has to do their own work in order to create a different
Yep.
healthy system.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. So here's what I got on the page. You can tell me where we need to go next.
Okay.
Because we're like only halfway through our questions.
I know,
right?
that's why
It's
I'm
so
like,
great.
there's so
No, it's
much.
great. We got co-regulation.
That's a good one.
Do we want to talk about that? Do we want to talk about, let's see, practical applications and
Let's talk about
healing?
co-regulation.
Go okay.
That's a good one. So we kind of touched on it,
Yep.
excuse me, before, where my nervous system is reading your nervous system.
Okay.
So I think of co-regulation as, I'm going to make it applicable to Valiant. Let's say you're a new client and you come, this is your first day, and you're just terrified.
Yep.
Well, tell me how you felt that first day.
Yeah, I was scared to death. I had no idea what to expect. I didn't know if I was going to be put in a padded room for 90 days and unlocked. I just had so I was super afraid, felt tons of shame, and really sad.
Yeah.
That I really missed my family.
Yep.
Like, just the shame and sadness was overwhelming.
Yes.
And then I was angry. Like, why am I here? Running through all those emotions. Like, first of all, I'm pissed that I have to be here because of, my actions and everything else. And I'm pissed that there's worse people in the world that aren't here. Why am I here? And they're not, I have to be here. So it was just a cluster of
Totally.
high emotion.
And so you're vacillating between sympathetic and dorsal.
Yeah.
And then you come to Valiant, and I didn't know you then, but but co-regulation works as the more calm and resourced our own nervous systems are, like staff. You're going to start to pick up on that.
Okay.
If housing is, mostly stable and resourced, the treatment team is, your peers are, there's co-regulation happening because you're dysregulated when you come.
Yep.
And that's why it's so important for our team to just be that place of like, hey, we're that warm hug, we're safe.
Yeah.
And then maybe not right away, but in time, your system is going to go, okay, I feel I can self-regulate now. Co-regulation leads to self-regulation.
Okay. Okay. Is that kind of drafting off someone else's
nervous system?
Nervous system. Yeah.
Right. And again, like if you come into Valiant or somewhere else and everybody's just like super chaotic and anxious and angry, you're gonna feel that.
Well, there was a period of time when I was here where the milieu was very dysregulated together.
Yep.
Towards Valiant.
Yep. That
So
happens.
you've never experienced that before.
Yeah.
And it was all of us addicts in one place together, banding together to fight back for whatever little bit of control that we could get. Looking back on it, was completely ridiculous. But similar thing in reverse, right?
Exactly.
We were kind of dysregulating one another.
Yep. And that's a great example, right?
Okay.
Of this is how our nervous system affects other people. I mean, I'm going to take it into a bigger scale I think about the pandemic and all of this fear that was happening. And then it was breeding more fear and breeding anger. And that's another example of this is how it works, right? Or you go into a meeting, a 12-step meeting, and you're like, I don't want to be here. I hate this.
Right.
And then by the end of the meeting, you're like, oh, okay, it was all right. Because there's co-regulation happening in that room. We just don't know it, but we feel it.
We feel it.
Yeah.
That happens every Tuesday night. We have our alumni meeting every Tuesday night. It's a Zoom meeting. Guys from all over the nation tune in. And a lot of times that is tough. It's like 8 o'clock on a Tuesday night and I'm exhausted, I'm tired, whatever. But by the end of the meeting, every time, literally every time, I'm like, I love those guys. They're my brothers. I needed that tonight.
Right.
And it was just attunement. Yeah. Co-regulation, I guess, is a new word for me, but that's what's happening.
Well, yeah. And all these other examples you can think of, you go somewhere, you don't really want to be there. And then the person that greets you, I'm thinking of a dentist office.
Okay.
I don't love the dentist.
Yeah. Who
Maybe
does?
most people. You go in and say the person that greets you just has a really warm smile and their tone is really soothing.
Yeah.
Your nervous system is going to go through neuroception is going to be like, okay, cool. I feel safe. My heart rate is calming down a little bit. I can take a deep breath.
Well, and what a great gift we can give to people too.
Yeah.
I know it's not all about that, but like as you're talking about, like to be able to be a person, to be that person for other people, realizing that we do have an effect on people that we encounter. So the fact that if we show up in the world as a non-anxious presence, obviously that's great for us, but it's great for everyone in our ecosystem too.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the whole idea of Polyvagal, is to understand more about your nervous system so that you can come at it from a place of not reacting.
Right.
Which that's very hard to do.
Totally.
I'm not saying like, again, the goal is to be adventural, but the goal is to really notice where you are on the map and figure out or feel what you need in order to get resourced. And then that's going to impact others.
Yeah.
And we're not perfect at it. I mean, even as a therapist,
you don't have it dialed in completely.
I wish
yet.
I did. And there are certain days like I feel it and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm really in it.
But at least you have the awareness of it, right?
Yeah.
Now, because I think you said it earlier, which I think it's so important. It's been important for me at least, is not even to try to fix myself when I feel it, but just to be aware of it and say, okay, because that's even when we started this conversation, I was just like, let's tell me the fix. How do I stay in this state of like that's always my default, but giving myself the grace to be able to feel something and just to be able to sit in it. Like, I'm sad right now. I'm not gonna.
Right.
Not that there's not tools. I can go on a walk and do different things.
But to sit with it.
To sit with it.
In relationship with it, like a part.
Yeah.
Right. And also not to when we're in sympathetic and we rage and we break a window, to say like, well, I mean, that's just my sympathetic. Like, I'm not saying that either.
Right. It's not a free pass
No.
to just act a fool.
but it's to kind of reflect probably later and go,
Yeah.
okay, what was I scared
going on?
of? What did I feel threatened by?
Yeah.
What was happening? Is this related to trauma?
Yeah.
Is this right? To just get
Yeah.
more curious when you're able.
Once, isn't that so much of addiction is that, which is if I can have awareness over what I'm actually feeling,
Mm-hmm.
then I can choose to not medicate with whatever the drug of choice,
Right.
whatever. I can say, oh, this is what's actually happening. I mean, probably one of my biggest takeaways from being here was the alcohol, the sex, the drugs, whatever. That's a symptom of the deeper issue that's going on. And we all
Right.
have more in common with one another, actually,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of what your drug of choice is. Like deep down, we're all experience fear, anxiety, anger, the same kind of core feelings.
Lack of connection. Yes.
Lack of connection.
Mm-hmm.
And we're learning how to, that's the intimacy disorder thing. I've heard you and Jill and others say, like, really all addiction is an intimacy disorder.
Right.
We're learning how to kind of reconnect ourselves back in the world without having to use people or other things or substances or whatever.
And we can connect back in the world when we are in ventral, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And think about a time when you're in sympathetic and you're either really anxious or maybe having I'll use my own example of like fighting with my spouse.
Yeah.
Neither of us are going to make a good decision
Right.
in that moment.
Right.
We're hijacked by
Right.
our emotions and we're protective.
Yeah.
It's only when we're able to move out of those states are we able to go, okay,
Yeah.
maybe get curious intellectually
Yeah.
or feel that love for one another.
Yeah.
But when we're hijacked, we can't.
So practically speaking, in that example, is it best to kind of take a break and allow yourself to?
Maybe.
Okay.
Maybe. That's one option. Or sometimes, my spouse and I practice this a lot because we both have done a lot of therapy
Mhm.
and really look at a lot of this from Polyvagal.
And you're wrong a lot, so there's
And
probably a lot of
I'm often wrong.
tension in the
Right.
house because of that. But
Right.
go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, and thank you for pointing that out. That's helpful.
I'll let you finish. Sorry, I just wanted to.
Oh my God. We've tried to learn how to co-regulate. So if somebody is less angry, to kind of go, okay, I'm feeling this. My partner, I'm noticing is also in sympathetic. What is going to help him? What I've learned about my husband Ron is to give him some touch, to hug him.
Okay.
That's hard for me because I have attachment wounding like crazy.
Wow.
So I've had to do a lot of work on, okay, I don't feel safe at all. I just want to run away. And that's going to make everything worse. So practicing with my nervous system and going, okay, he needs connection. He needs to know that it's okay. That's the hard thing.
That's really beautiful. That seems like 401 level. To be able to acknowledge in the middle of when both people are somewhat dysregulated, to be able to acknowledge in the middle, hey, he or she is more dysregulated than me right now, so I can actually show up for them.
And let me be clear, that's probably happened like twice,
Oh,
right? Like
right,
this isn't
right.
like a
No, but I love that idea. I mean,
Yeah.
if we can, it goes back to the awareness. If we can understand and be aware and co-regulate, like, hey, this is actually going to diffuse.
Yeah.
Threw an extra S in there. Diffuse the whole situation.
Right.
If I can dig deep and show up for my partner
Right.
in this way.
And this is kind of another rabbit trail, but our spouses are like it's like learning how the car works. Like learning how their system works.
How their system works.
And that takes time, and that takes vulnerability, and that takes a lot of work and patience, and we're not perfect. I mean, I can have this talk and then go home and probably start a fight with them because I'm wrong a lot, apparently.
That's what Ron told me.
He's
got me on
he's
speed
right,
dial. And he's like, wrong again.
Yeah, this is what you're doing. And then
Well, in practice, it's always harder to put it into practice, the theory. But
I know.
I feel like even just this conversation for me is going to help me. Like you said, it shows up in our everyday life.
Yes.
We can check in with ourselves throughout the day and kind of be like, okay,
what's and feeling it in our body. Like I was just noticing, like my arms got a little tense.
Really?
And it was probably because I shared a vulnerable piece of my personal life, and so there was
when you're talking about the marriage piece, your arm got tense.
Yep.
Interesting.
So again, I'm just kind of putting this in practical content of okay, I felt a little bit nervous there. I'm
Yeah.
sharing something vulnerable. What are other people going to think? Oh my God, like
Tighten up
those.
a little bit.
Right. So I tighten. So, am I in full sympathetic? No, but I feel a little bit of it. So it's also being able to feel what are we feeling in our body, whether it's muscle tension, our heart is increasing. We might have dry mouth. We
Yep.
might be fidgeting, right? It's really starting to go, what is happening in my body?
Interesting.
And when we're in addiction, we don't pay
No.
attention to any of that at
No,
all.
not at all.
This is another practice that I think is so important and why I kind of brought it into Valiant. I'm
Yeah.
like, yeah, this is a great thing to start learning.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Before we go, anything else that needs to be shared on Polyvagal?
Probably.
This has been extremely helpful. Like, this is an
Good.
episode that I'll go back and listen to again myself.
I hope so. I hope it wasn't too much information where I confused people.
I don't think so. I mean, I felt confused a couple times, but you went back and explained it really well. So
Okay.
thank you for
good
for sharing this. And for those listening, watching, again, if they want to do more digging on this,
Yes.
what's some resources?
So Stephen Porges and his son, who's a journalist, wrote a book, and it's a really great read. I wasn't
Okay.
lost in the technical terms.
Okay.
It's called Our Polyvagal World.
Okay.
It's pretty recent. I think that came out this year.
Oh, okay.
And then honestly, anything by Deb Dana. There's one she wrote called Anchored. And yeah, it's just you read it and you're like, oh, yeah, this makes sense. And then
Yeah.
I want to read it again and
Yeah.
then again because it's a
New
lot.
things every time, probably.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you get lost in the words of neuroception and ventral and
Yeah.
dorsal and all the things. And then once you start to really internalize it, you can take the understanding from out of your brain and into your body.
Yeah.
But I mean, for me, it's taken a lot of years to really, and I'm still doing it. I'm taking a
Sure.
training right now. So the more I read about it, the more I talk about it,
Yep.
the more I teach it in groups, the more I go back and I'm like, oh, actually, I was wrong on that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I need to,
Well, and that's what's fun about something like this being such a deep well, is that you don't
Yeah.
ever really get to the bottom. You just kind of keep learning and experiencing and
Yes.
applying it and all that
Yes.
stuff.
Yeah.
Great job. Thank you
Thanks.
for sharing with us.
Thank you. Oh,
Cheers. One final cheers. You want to hit your mic one last time before we close?
Cheers to myself.